Well, welcome everybody to tonight's RSA webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Meredith Doig. I'm the president of the Rationalist Society of Australia. And for those of you who don't know what the Rationalist Society of Australia is, we're an organisation that lobbies for reason and evidence in public policy. It's something that we've been doing since 1906, so we're over 115 years old, almost 114 years old. So each month for the RSA webinar series, we invite a special guest speaker to present on important, timely topics, but from a rationalist perspective. And of course, tonight, we're very pleased to have Mike Gaffney with us. Mike's the Independent MLC for Mersey in Tasmania. And he's going to be talking about his personal journey championing and ultimately being successful in bringing voluntary assisted dying to the law in Tasmania. As a matter of policy, the RSA does support the right of individuals with terminal disease and intolerable suffering to choose their end of life, to end their life with dignity, providing that this is entirely voluntary and subject to, obviously, the appropriate safeguards. So Mike's presentation will go for about 20 or 30 minutes, and he and I might have a bit of an interaction during that time, and then we'll have about 25 minutes at the end for Q&A. As I mentioned before, there's a Q&A icon down the bottom, and if there are questions that you have during Mike's presentation, please type them, and then we'll go through those at the end when Mike finishes. The webinar will be recorded and it'll be made available via our YouTube channel in the next few days. We'll send you a note when it's available. Just by way of setting the context, last year, just before the COVID lockdown in Melbourne, I was part of organising a national conference of Dying with Dignity groups from all around Australia. And I have to say, one of the most sobering presentations at that conference was from a couple of Liberal MPs. Now, these were people who actually voted in favour of the draft VAD bill in the Victorian Parliament. And they spoke very frankly about what it was like to stand against the majority of their colleagues and vote, well, debate, discuss, advocate in favour of voluntary assisted dying when most of their colleagues were going in the opposite direction. And they said, look, despite it being a conscience vote, there was huge pressure against these people not to make waves. And it would have been much easier for them to just sit in a corner and stay quiet and just go along with the majority of their colleagues. But as they said to us at that conference, in good conscience, they could not do that. Unfortunately, for the Victorian bill, they did not, and their votes were really crucial in getting the first VAD bill across the line. One of the things I remember from one of these two Liberal MPs was that he said, look, you're never going to get VAD up in a state that's ruled by the Libs, and you're never going to get it up if it's a private member's bill. Well, we've got the person with us tonight who proved him wrong. Mike, please tell us your story.
I wish you'd spoken to me before. Look, thank you. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak. And to those people out there, some who I know and some who I don't, I'd just like to say it's been a very exciting journey, one that is not without challenges. but that's to be expected. I'm just going to spend probably 20, 25 minutes talking about the Tasmanian experience, knowing that some people listening in will be well aware of the Tasmanian system and some may not. So I will sort of try and do a balancing act there. And I look forward to the questions at the end, because I think that's where people could pinpoint some things that I might skip over. I do tend to speak quite quickly. And Meredith, if you get these people coming through saying, it's too fast, I can't understand him, just let me know and I'll slow down. I'd also have to say right up front, there are so many people going through this journey, not only here in Australia, but internationally. And I've been amazed at the amount of support that I've received from individuals, from groups, through, in all the states, and then internationally as well, as we've embarked on this journey. And I can remember somebody saying, Michael, good try, but you're never going to get this up as an independent. I have a staff of one person and myself. And so to actually do this work has been quite an achievement within itself, not saying from me, but from everybody involved. And so I do want to take the opportunity to thank those people. I won't mention individuals because you always miss somebody, but from organisations within Tasmania, I'd have to say Dying with Dignity Tas and Your Choice Tas, which I'll come back to, have been very important through the whole journey. I would like to say that in Tasmania, for those who are not aware, we have a lower house and an upper house, 25 members in the lower house and 15 members in the upper house. And so this bill has appeared in Tasmania on 3 previous occasions. In 2009, Nick McKim, as the Greens senator, put forward the Dying with Dignity bill. That was 19 pages long. That was actually my first year in Parliament. And myself and there were 3 MLCs and 4 MHAs, members of the House of Assembly, put together to make a select inquiry to look at the bill. Whilst back then I was even in favour of voluntary assisted dying, or that as an issue, the bill was not strong enough for us to recommend, and the findings that came from that supported that it wasn't a strong enough bill. It was defeated 15-7 in the lower house, so it didn't even get to the committee stage. There was a bit of angst there between the opponents to Dying with Dignity. Came out and said, well, palliative care Tasmania, they want people to die with dignity too. What are you doing? And so already there was an immediate barrier put between what Nick intended and the debate in the community. So moving on, in 2013, it came back as a voluntary assisted dying bill. The name had changed. They'd taken that on board, and that was put forward by the Premier, Lara Giddings, and Nick McKim as joint private independent members. Whilst they were members of houses, Labor and the Greens, it was an individual one. That had the best chance, and that was defeated 13-11, so it didn't even get into the committee stage. In 2016, it was again reintroduced, virtually a similar bill to what was the 2013 bill, and that lost 16-8. And so it was not going forward, and in that 2016 vote, only one member of the Liberal Party, even though they had a conscience vote, actually supported the bill. That was Nick Street. And so I think that's really important in the context of where we went to. So all 3 attempts failed in the lower house. And about 2017, I was asked by Dying with Dignity Tasmania, if they rescheduled the bill, if they reintroduced the bill, would I carry the bill in the upper house if it was passed downstairs? They knew that I was somebody who was socially progressive. They knew that I like people to have choice. And so I said, yes, I would. As soon as I said, yes, I would, I was a bit concerned that, if I'm going to carry a bill in the upper house, I better understand more about what it's about. So as my colleagues would know, I rarely travel because I'm quite guarded about people's purse, but I actually put in for a travel scholarship of $3,500 and was awarded that. And I spent 17 days and I flew to Amsterdam, I trained to Bruges, I trained down to Zurich, I flew across to Halifax in Nova Scotia and then to Vancouver and to Portland, Oregon. And I was really fortunate I did that because I met with some of the world's authorities in their countries on their legislation, whether they were medical experts, whether it was legal experts, or those from the judiciary. And people like, and some people out there would understand, Rob Jonquière in Amsterdam, Sylvain Lully in Switzerland, Jocelyn Downey in Canada. And these people impacted greatly on the way I felt the bill needed to go. So with that in mind, when I came back, it was interesting that Scott Bacon then resigned from the Labor Party downstairs, and Scott was a supporter, and his replacement wasn't a person who was in favour of voluntary assisted dying and had spoken out against it. So in discussion with Dying with Dignity Tas, it felt to me that I don't think this will pass downstairs. If you introduce it down there, it's not going to get through because of the party political. I said, why don't we try it in the upper house? And they were very pleased because they've been thinking along the same lines. That to me took on a different perspective, as though if you carry somebody else's bill from downstairs, you're actually defending the bill. To introduce a private member's bill in the upper house meant that I had to be comfortable with all aspects of the bill. I think there was a push from Dying with Dignity Tas, well, let's just get the 2016 bill and adjust that with some of the things that have happened in Victoria and WA, and good on those states for going down that path, and then put it forward. I didn't like that approach, and I wasn't agreeing to that approach. I think one of the things I found in the Tasmanian domain, and it might be in other places, that the first thing you hear about a sensitive issue is when it's being debated in the Parliament, and there hasn't really been authentic community consultation. And so I wrote to the Premier and I said, look, I need access to OPC, Office of Parliamentary Counsel, and Hodgman then at the time said, yes, Michael, you can, but not to agencies. So the only person I had access to was to the Chief Counsel of Office of Parliamentary Counsel, and she was fantastic. We met prior to Christmas with a draft of the bill, and myself, a member from Dying with Dignity Tasmania and OPC, and instantly there was some concern that we weren't going down the same path. And so at that stage, it felt it was better it was myself continuing with OPC. So what happened on late January, we presented a bill, a draft bill, and it purposefully was a draft bill, and that was 106 pages, based a lot on the Tasmanian bill that had been put forward in 2016, which had a lot of synergies with the Canadian experience. There was a lot of work there along with Canada, more so than perhaps the Victorian model with the Oregon bill. And we'll get back to that later. What happened then is about the same time, it's probably a good time for me to raise this, about the same time that I put out that I was doing all these forums around the state, I did a practice run at the Latrobe Bowls Club. My family, my friends came to listen to the presentation. And that was, I can remember, I'm good with dates, it was Thursday the 20th. And I remember going home that night and I said to my wife, what did you think? She said, oh, it's a bit boring, Michael, and you talk too much. Okay, I get it. But I knew what she meant because I was so focused on doing the legislation and working out a strategy. I didn't really want to get involved in the emotion. I had no family or friends at that stage that would have chosen. So for me, that was a good starting point. There was no, I've got to do this for Aunt Betty or, Granddad or Pop or whatever. But that night when I got home, I actually had an email from Jackie and Natalie Gray. And Jack and Nat said, Mr. Gaffney, we realise you're doing presentations next month across Tasmania. This is our mother's diary entry, and it was written on the 20th of September, private, and Diane Gray passed away 9 days later, and it was her last diary entry. And it was quite touching and it was quite moving what she'd written. And Diane had supported voluntary assisted dying in Victoria and wished that that was available. So immediately, part of what I had to do was solved because the young ladies were so articulate and so well presented and so good at what they did They were on ABC radio. They got a lot of media coverage. And I'm not sure if you can see this, but this is Jack and Nat.
We can see it.
And many people would be aware of and that was wonderful. I met with the girls I was doing a presentation in Hobart. We met, we immediately clicked. I rang, that's right, on the Friday morning after receiving the email from them, I rang and said, Jack, would you mind doing a voiceover of your mum's last diary entry, and I will use that in the forums. And it was such a good idea in the fact that, one, they sent it to me and it just gelled the whole information forum. So I think in February I did 35 forums across Tasmania, and each forum was about an hour and a half. And that included, we have 29 local government areas. So I did 2 on the islands, King Island, Flinders Island, because you're there for the day, you might as well do an afternoon and night. And that was really good, because what that did to me, it got the message out there, and everybody who came to the forums, I remember a lady in Devonport going, I don't want any medical professionals near me. I don't want a doctor within 50 miles so you can know her age when I take this. So why haven't you got that in the bill? And at that stage in the draft bill, I hadn't the private self-administration that they were doing in Victoria. And then when in Victoria, on February the 19th, the 6-month operation plan came out, and they had 52 people had access VAD, and that 43 of those had chosen a self-administration certificate way, a permanent way. And so that showed to me that, you know, there's something in this. So between that bill on the 27th, that draft on the 27th, and the draft that went out early in June, the second draft to the public, I made some changes on that feedback. And I think that was really important, because whenever I was on the radio or giving media interviews, I always said, to me, this comes down to choice. And one of the things what I learned in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands are quite religious in a lot of ways. They hold religion, you know, and I said to them, how did you get this through? You know, you've got the Orthodox Church and you've got the Catholics. How did you get this through? And they said, yes, the Dutch are quite religious in a lot of ways, but they also have a high priority for an individual's right to choose. And that was really important, because that's the line I kept all the way through this. It wasn't about VAD, it was about a person's right to choose. And that was important. And I needed to make sure that it was different from the other previous bills. I remember in March last year, one minister from the Liberal government who walked past me, who would never ever vote for the bill, said, oh, Michael, nice try, but it's the same bill, just rehashed. You know, you're not going to get this passed. And that's why I went to end of life choices, voluntary assisted dying. And it was only 2 days later, I actually went on to the website and saw that New Zealand, their committee was end of life choice. So that was
this is that you changed the title of the bill.
Yeah, changed the title, because I think it was important that they couldn't use the excuse that this was the same bill, just rewrapped. And so the OPC, she was brilliant.
In the Office of Parliamentary Counsel.
Yep, senior officer there. And actually, I found out later that Robin started her drafting career in the Northern Territory, where Marshall Perron had introduced that when she was a junior drafter. So she was quite excited, and she was brilliant. And I'd go down looking forward to the meetings. I'd come away from the meetings having a lot more work to do, because it was all about policy decisions and, you know, how to go with that. So then what happened, very quickly, the bill was tabled in August the 25th, sorry. And the bill went from 106 pages to 120 to 157 pages. The day after I tabled the bill, I then get a letter from the Premier, as did all members of Parliament, saying these are the 33 points the agencies had concerns with the bill that I just tabled.
The agencies
might have been Health Department, might have been Justice Department, communities, agencies of the government. I didn't get that information before I was drafting the bill. So what happened then is, once I spoke to the bill and then made some amendments to address some of those 33 concerns for myself, so that once we got to debating the bill, if we did, then that would be, I was ready for that. I think I've tried to be open and transparent all the way through this process and respectful of different points of view. And I think that that's right. One of the aspects we did, the Jack and Nat wanted to be involved and they wanted to do something, and they said, "What can we do?" I said, "Well, what about an electronic petition?" They said, "Yes, we'll organise that." So they went off and organised that, and 13,000 signatures, came back and was tabled in Parliament in the August by Cassie O'Connor downstairs, because that created more interest in the bill. One of the first information sessions I had a young lady come speak to me about her mother, and she said, "I want to tell people what happened with my mother." And I thought, I said, well, will you write down your story and you send it to me? And so out of that, I thought at every information form, I thought, well, I'll make that offer for those for and against the VAD. And I thought if I get 30, 40 stories, I'll be able to use that and submit that as part of Parliament's reading for every politician. Well, this is the book. 109 submissions I received. I included one from New South Wales. I included an international one from a lady in Canada. The New South Wales one wanted me to not have the residency criteria because they didn't have it in New South Wales. And I thought, well, if I include that, another parliamentarian might pick up on it. And the other one was, the international one was there to show that this is a worldwide and what had happened in Canada, from that area. And so that was really good. I tabled that submission, and each politician received a copy of that. All the way through this process, I'd been feeding information, articles, video clips to all the politicians, meeting with them on a one-to-one, hearing if I heard any concerns, I would go and speak with those people. So there's a lot of background work. Don't get me wrong, there were 4 or 5 that were never going to come and never going to. And so you've just got to cut your cloth and go with the ones that you think you might be able to win over.
Did you actually meet with them though, Mike? And did you hear their arguments?
Yeah, definitely. For example, one Labor member downstairs who was, he had some concerns about the prognosis time, the 6 and 12 months. And in my original bill, I didn't have a time frame. I was going down to Canadian, Netherlands, because I believe it's difficult for a doctor to give an exact prognosis of time. But however, he did highlight something about neurodegenerative in my draft bill. And I said to the politician, thank you so much for picking that up. I will use that. And just by changing that amendment, when he got up to speak, he was able to say, and I met with Michael early on, Mr. Gaffney early on, and he listened to what I said, and there's been a change in the bill. And so he then had some ownership of the bill. And so therefore, I suppose strategically his vote was secured, which was the aim. Just very quickly, when I said before
5 minutes before we're into Q&A.
Yep, no, and it's gone really quickly, sorry. I think what was important though is in September when I tabled the bill, and then I gave it 2 weeks before I actually spoke to it, because I did all these briefings with them, and Cam McLaren, Nick Carr, Ben and Lindy, Dying with Dignity. There were 7 groups of religious groups against the bill.
So just to clarify for the people who are watching, those names that you just said, these are people from other states who themselves have been very involved in either leading up to drafting a bill themselves or the implementation of voluntary assisted dying in Victoria.
And that was really important because I was presenting to the members of the Legislative Council because the House of Assembly weren't there. And so therefore we filmed all of those interviews, those briefings, and we had the Archbishop, we had, Richard Humphrey, we had the Catholic Women's League, as many different groups. And then we had the AMA, the nurses, Palliative Care Tasmania. And that was a really smart move because back in 2009, there was a wedge between Palliative Care Tasmania. As soon as I started this journey, I got to know Colleen Johnson, who's the CEO, and she was very supportive. And I've been to conferences and meetings in the information forum. She said, and I want along the lines of, I want Tasmanians to be assured that if they choose voluntary assisted dying, then they will receive palliative care all the way up until the end point. So it was her affirmation of that. So you had to sort of manipulate. But 15-0, it was passed in the upper house. 15-0. And I think that's a world first. And then downstairs, very quickly, 18-7 principal support. 7 of the people who had voted against it in 2014 and 18, and that included the Premier, the Deputy Premier, and some of the ministers, actually voted in support of the bill. So something had changed from 2018, and I think it was the sway of the community, over 80%, 83% of Tasmanians, and it was being talked about. It was not something, you know, and I'd walk into a coffee shop and I didn't know the person, they'd walk past me and they'd say, good on you, keep going with the bill.
Right.
So the community were behind it. Now, I know I've got a couple of minutes.
Yes. And then we'll open it up to questions. Just a reminder for people who are watching, if you do want to ask a question of Mike, just go to the little Q&A box, and that's where you can type in your questions. We now have 2 questions. Thank you.
Okay. And just so for people to understand, for example, in the last 10 or 11 years in Tasmania, there have been 10 private members' bills in 11 years. So it's quite unusual. Only 4 of those have passed. This one was 180 pages, and I actually did a fire offences bill in 2015 that passed as well. And so it's very unusual. Most bills, and for example, in 2018, 2017, there were 58 bills that originated in the lower house. So that gives some context to that. The AMA is an interesting one. I will highlight that. I was concerned with the AMA that I wanted, because they're always vocally against it. And I said, look, why can't I meet with your subcommittee looking at the bill and discuss this with you? And I got an invitation. And I thought, great, I'll go along and we can go through it and I can see if I can work out some of the issues. 4 days before that meeting took place, my invitation was withdrawn. So I never ever met with the AMA about the bill. We had them in for a briefing and they did make, oh yes, we've met with Mike. And I said, well, listen, correction there. This is what occurred. And so that's fine, I don't mind, but this is what occurred. The invitation to talk about the bill when it was going through the stakeholder consultation phase didn't eventuate. Media assistance, very quickly with this one. This magazine here goes in the weekend Mercury, which is our major paper down south. When the wonderful article, the young guy did a great job, 4 or 5 pages in the middle, but his dot points on the inside were taken from the number 13 draft. By the time it went to Parliament, it was the 22nd draft, so quite a bit had changed. Right. And so when I saw the thing on the Friday night, the electronic version, I said, oh, Bonnie, look at this. And I contacted the people and I said, look, Michael, we can change on an electronic, not a problem. But they said it got printed on Tuesday. It's going out tomorrow. I said, would you like to speak to the editor? And this is 6:30 on the Friday night before the Saturday paper, yeah? And so the editor rang and said, Michael, is this going to hurt the cause? And I said, look, I can't complain because he's done such a wonderful job with the article, but yes, it will, but we'll live with that. She said, is there anything I can do? I said, well, perhaps on the inside of page 2 tomorrow, you might put a little thing saying that there's an error in the magazine and that will be corrected during the week. Well, I woke up Saturday morning, when I got the paper, they had rearranged page 2 of the Mercury from 6:30 that night and put in the whole section that should have been included in the first place. And you wouldn't get that anywhere else in Australia. And so on the Monday, I think they got $75 worth of donuts at the Mercury. Yeah, and the last one, there was a...
The donuts made the difference.
Yeah. Well, you got to say thank you to people. You know, even those I didn't agree with, some of their conversations and whatever. And there was one where I was coming over the lakes, because I travelled from the lakes because I lose mobiles to reception for about an hour. And when I got to Deloraine, I heard the radio interview, and there was a life insurance guy on there saying, oh yes, if this bill goes through, a person won't be eligible for life insurance because it's suicide. And so I pulled over to the side of the road, rang the radio station, said, I need to speak to so-and-so. Who's that, Mike? Oh yeah, put you on now. And could read on the air, I think it was clause 125 at that stage, that a person who takes VADs does not die by suicide. So, quickly you're able to nip that in the bud. But if I hadn't heard that conversation, the listeners at that radio station would have then had perhaps the wrong perception of where it was. Okay. That's
Mike, we're going to have to get in. We've got questions coming out of our ears.
Okay. Thank you.
So, no, finish. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Look, I have 4 points. I'd say I think I had Bonnie and myself, and then about 5 months before the finish, I actually got a third person in because the workload, because when Bonnie and I were discussing something, it was like she might have had a point of view and I had a point of view. It was helpful having a third person so that we could, and then when I was dealing with this, I'd say, Phil, I don't need all that information. Just give me the answer, So it was that sort of pressure. Non-government bill, the Premier was very smart. The Premier actually sent it off to UTAS, the bill, for an independent review in February, and it came back. I was really pleased. It came back and said, this is a very safe piece of legislation. So that was great. Again, the agencies also put out a document then, and Sarah Courtney, the Minister for Health, who elected not as Minister for Health, but as a private member to carry the bill for me downstairs, eternally grateful for her to have the courage to do that and take on board this bill, because there were some ministers down there, 4 ministers down there that were not in favour of it. And I needed somebody at ministerial level to actually hold them back and be able to, and she did a wonderful job, and was supported by the Premier, the Deputy Premier, and 2 other ministers in supporting the bill. That's it. I'll take your questions.
As you can see, Mike is incredibly enthusiastic, and I think it's just your energy that sort of rolled over everybody, Mike, in this case. But congratulations on what we all know was a really difficult challenge, coming as it did after so many rejections. But I think it's been really helpful to see the way that you personally, you used your, may I say, charisma, but your energy as well, to really open up to people and to listen to those people. Let's get to the questions. And you just spoke about the insurance companies. And the first question is from Malcolm Gardam. And he says, how have insurance companies reacted to the legislation in terms of where a person may have a life insurance policy in place? Has it made any difference to those, do you think? No,
and I haven't heard anywhere in the world, I haven't heard anywhere or read anywhere where it has made an issue, because it's so well constructed. It's a legal procedure. What is happening? It's a legal health. It's actually covered under our Health Act. So it's actually a legal. So, and I would think that any company down here that tried to do that would find themselves very much on the outer. And because our bill says that VAD, or taking of the substance, is not suicide, therefore it doesn't fall under the ban that they can't do it. The thing that worries me most, well, the thing that I'm aware of, as are other people, the people who do commit suicide because they don't think they have a choice.
Yeah.
And they do commit it, and studies have shown in Western Australia and Victoria about 10% of people who do commit suicide have a terminal illness. And so to me that is of a greater concern. But thank you, Malcolm. I'm actually seeing him tomorrow morning for a meeting.
Very good, very good. A couple of people put in questions as they registered. So I'm going to take one of the questions from there. And this is from Sid Finnegan. Great work, Mike. Any guess on how far into the future, that VAD may be written into advanced healthcare directives for advanced dementia?
Yeah. Look, I think the best place for him to look at that information is to go to the Canadian experience at the moment. I listened to Jocelyn Downey just last week, and there is movement in that space, and also in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things, that was one of the issues that came up all the time when I was going through this process. But I think, as Victoria and WA would have found, you can't afford to have that conversation on the table when you're trying to introduce legislation. I think that is a discussion that's going to have, and there is work being done on that now. And I think that people will understand and will, I think, listen to the Canadians last Thursday. And I'm sure, Jocelyn, Meredith, you could forward that to anybody to see it, because it's a really good explanation where they're headed, and much further down the track than I would be able to answer. Okay.
Thank you. There's a note from, I'm just going back to the Q&A section now. There's a note from Desley Heckney, who basically, Desley, I think I'll take this as a comment, and she's saying that she's an RN and a retired academic in Brisbane, and she's very happy to help in Queensland. I think, Desley, the best thing you can do is contact Dying with Dignity Queensland, because it's really getting to the pointy end in Queensland, and I'm sure that they would be very happy to get your sort of support there.
Ms. Meredith,
yes.
On that, I think one of the things that I found that I've been pleased with being able to do in Tasmania is registered nurses are actually part of the administrating health practitioner down here. Mm-hmm. And we've done that for a specific reason, and because we don't have enough health practitioners down here. And I thought, if you look at some of our island situation, where you'll have a community nurse who might have been there forever, you may have a doctor there who may have a conscientious objection and may not want to be involved. Mm-hmm. A locum may be dealing with that person who's eligible and is determined to be able to have the final request. Mm. If the locum has flown and said, look, this has got to happen by 3:30 on Friday because I've got to catch the plane back, instead of the community nurse, who could be the administrating health practitioner if they want to be involved and if they've done the training, say, when do you want this done? And the family can say, look, we want it done on Sunday with everybody around, and that's when we want to say goodbye. So from my point of view, using registered nurses, who I find probably are better than, with all due respect to many of our doctors, are better at that type of care anyway. And so to me, it made sense.
And the role of, Michael Wilson's just making a comment that the role of nurses in the Tasmanian bill is frontline compared to the rest of Australia. However, that's not quite true, because in the draft Queensland bill, nurses are able to be to do the training and to be administrators.
Yeah, is that nurse practitioners though?
Nurse practitioners.
Yeah, and so here in Tasmania, they have nurse practitioners in WA. In Tasmania, registered nurses.
Right.
And in Canada, they have nurse practitioners that are assessors and providers. So that's another element, but we couldn't go there.
Right. Just on that, what would you say are the main points of difference in your bill compared to the two acts that came before, the Victorian one and the Western Australian one? The things that you say, yes, this is an improvement, this is progress.
Yes. And look, I have to say up front, good on Victoria and good on WA. It's really well done. I have a couple of things that we've been able to do. The Victorian one, they made a bit of an issue. I'm not going to say they made a mistake, but they hadn't really thought through about the residency issue.
Yes.
And so we included ours in the Tasmanian bill, or has been a resident in Australia for at least 3 continuous years. Mm-hmm. So therefore, that took away the whole Australian citizen or permanent residency issue.
Which has been a stumbling block in Victoria.
Our doctors and our healthcare workers are permitted to raise VAD as an option, which they can't do in Victoria, but they can in WA, as long as they raise all the other options. One of the things that we have done, I like the Queensland one, where I think they've got a 12, and I'm not an authority on that, so somebody will correct me, but I think they're going for 12 months, which I think is, we've got 6 and 12, months, but in that, for exceptional circumstances, the person can apply to the commission.
So there's some flexibility.
Yeah, so I didn't want the 6 and 12, but it's there and that's compromised, that's fine. So that's 6 months and 12 months for neurodegenerative. But in that, we also included, for exceptional circumstances, they can apply to the commission. I think that was really good. A couple other things. A person in Tasmania can privately self-administer, as they can in Victoria with a permit, but also they can have a doctor or an AHP present in the room or next door if they want, so that they can be. So there's 3 up there. We talked about the registered nurse. I'm actually pleased that our training modules, the training modules in Victoria and WA, I think, are by medical practitioners, by doctors. Our training modules will actually include advice from medical practitioners, registered nurses, a person nominated by the public guardian, a person nominated by the chief civil psychiatrist, and either a psychiatrist or a psychologist to get a better rounded module. And instead of having 2 witnesses for the second request, you can have 2 witnesses, but we also put it in that you can have, if you have a commissioner for statutory declarations, just the one person, because that's been some issue in some places. And telehealth. Telehealth has not. Yeah, we're really pleased. Have one. You've got to have at least one face-to-face.
Yes.
But and then audio-visual links and telehealth. We sort of similar to WA. I'm
just going to go on to the next question, which is from Nick Carr. And I'm going to relate this to some of you I know who are watching are from South Australia. And of course, there's a bill in the South Australian Parliament at the moment. Nick's question is, the vote in your upper house was eventually unanimous. What, in your view, changed the minds of those previously opposed? And if you could sort of have in your mind the South Australian situation, because Queensland's different, they don't have an upper house, but South Australia does. So, maybe if you answer this with a view of advising what the South Australians need to do to get their upper house members across the line.
I think the fact that it's a Labor person it's bringing it in as it's not independent South Australian, is it? It's a Labor person is bringing it in as a private members bill. Some of South Australia might be able to correct me on that. The fact that
from South Australia, tell us who's introducing.
I think it's
carrying it in. Yes, it's correct.
Yeah.
Ma.
Yeah, and so I think the fact that I was independent meant that in Tasmania the party thing didn't come into it at all. In the upper house, we had 3 or 4 people of faith that were really struggling with the bill. And I remember one, and I've got a lot of time for a newly elected member, and she was of the faith and she was struggling. She said, Mike, I just don't know. And she actually sat next to me. So I'd talk to her all the time and say, look, here's some more information. And in the end, it was all about her individual rights. And the fact that 80% of the community were in favour of this, and so she could still uphold her personal values, but she could still allow the rest of her community to have what they wanted as well.
So individual choice and reflecting the overwhelming majority of her constituents.
Yeah, exactly. And I give credit. And she actually, I do, and this is one of the briefings that we had was one from the Anglican Archbishop, from the Archbishop, the Catholic Archbishop, and Reverend Richard, Right Reverend Dean from Anglicare. The Archbishop was asked, if one of your followers took the substance, would you sit with them at the time of their death? And he said, no, I wouldn't. Asked the same question of the Anglican, and he said, I don't agree with it, but yes, of course I would. Now, I know the young lady who sat next to me was quite upset by what she'd heard. And I think that swung her. But at the end of the day, each person has their own.
Yes.
I was hoping 12-3 in the upper house. I was counting 13-2 maybe, but to get 15-0, and some who had previously voiced their opposition,
Yeah.
And same downstairs. It was quite a swing.
Now, Pat McCarthy is just saying what an outstanding representative of the community you are, Mike. I think we can see that. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
I'm going to go on to the next question, and this is from Michael Wilson, and he's making reference to VSED, but I don't know what that means. Does anybody know what VSED? Will VSED be supported in palliative care if VSED is used to precipitate eligibility for VAD?
It's to stop
voluntary stopping of eating and drinking. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. I think that's a little. It's really quite separate from VAD. Because the voluntary stopping of eating and drinking is a choice. It is a choice, an end-of-life choice that somebody in palliative care could, well, would the...
At the moment, that's possibly the only option open to some people who don't have VAD is not an option.
That's
so
right.
Therefore, what they do, they stop themselves eating and drinking, and they starve themselves to hasten death.
And some of the palliative care agencies or facilities would not view that positively.
Not certain.
That's why I say some. I think some would support, and so I think it really depends on. I don't think the palliative care industry has an overall policy on that. I hope that hours of ethical debate, yes. Neil Francis says this could go into hours of ethical debate, talking about acts of omission versus acts of commission. Absolutely right.
Actually, while Neil, I have to say, sometimes getting the bill through, I had to compromise on issues. I had two sections in the bill originally. One was a report looking into the underage, under 18s being able to access VAD. And mine just said within 3 years, a report would come back to government about what's happening elsewhere internationally. And Neil did some wonderful work, first-class work on that to provide some information. The media made so much of that. Not the media so much, but some people, some parliamentarians couldn't bring themselves to accept that would be in the bill. And so therefore it didn't get passed in the upper house. And I think that some who were supportive of the bill said, Michael, we're worried that if this goes downstairs with this in it, you might not get the required numbers downstairs to pass the bill. And so at the end of the day, it was one of those battles that, okay, that'll come back another day. I mean, to me, it's a nonsense that there's not the mature minor, but that's another debate. But it was interesting how compromise was part of the journey.
Right. Mike, I'm just going to go back to a question that was put in when people were registering, and this is from Michael Wilson. How has Tasmania responded to attempts by healthcare providers who receive public funding to prohibit access of patients or residents to legal assisted dying? Yeah,
well, that's yet to be seen. I was quite amazed actually. In the upper house, I thought, might lose this one because I didn't want to give any ground at all in our bill to say that I don't believe an entity has a objection, a conscientious objection. I don't understand that. However, we didn't give ground at all.
Your bill allows conscientious objection by individuals, but not by organisations.
Yeah, not by organisations. And that will come back, that debate. But at the very least, I think Jocelyn made a really good in her presentation last Thursday, where she said, if a care provider does not receive any public funding, whether state or federal, then perhaps they do have the right to say, but if they receive any public funding, and this is a health-related bill, then they shouldn't have the right to. And there was a challenge in Vancouver where a provider went in and was able to have the event, which is what they call it in Canada, was taken to court and was upheld that the individual's right overruled the organisation's right. The organisation structure. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Tanya. Delta Hospice, British Columbia, Canada.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, another question. This is from James Simons. Is resistance to VAD principally on religious grounds?
I think so. I think that's the main one that came through, and then you get this, and then you get the scaremongering with the slippery slope, the vulnerable, the elderly, and I've had so many of the elderly come and say, I'm not vulnerable, I'm old, but I'm not vulnerable, like I know what I want, I know what's going to happen. So yeah, I think that's the main one.
Yeah, I think that's commonly assumed to be the case. Malcolm Garden's got another one, but Lindsay Marshall, what was the most contentious provision in the bill, and did MPs who are VAD supporters express concerns, and how did you address those?
I had a lot of people saying to me right from the word go, even people very high up in the government, in the White House, saying don't include the one about the underage. That was the one. Don't Michael, don't go there. You're opening a can of worms. And we had a situation here in Tasmania where a young lady, a 13-year-old, wanted to be able to die at home. She was terminal, but they couldn't cater for her needs, and she had to go into a hospital for the last 2 days of her life, into a unit where she wasn't surrounded by her toys and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, well, no, for you, young lady, I'm going to stick with this bill, and I'm going to leave it in there. I'm going to fight it, and it was defeated.
I think, this is not over yet. It will, the whole debate and making it ethically more clear and defensible, that argument will continue over a number of years. Yeah,
and I think, Neil's work, I think there were 22 people in the last so many years under the age of 18 that actually have been legally able to take VAD. So it's not a huge number, but for those 22 people, it's a significant, it's a significant issue, I think, and for their families and friends. Yeah. So yeah.
Another question from the people who registered. The Netherlands are considering VAD for people in aged care facilities where the treating doctor of the residence makes the decision without consideration of family or the person's wishes. My question is this: do you see this happening here in Australia in the future?
I saw that question. I'm not questioning the premise of the question, but it would never happen in Tasmania because our bill doesn't allow that at the moment, and it would never happen because our legislation would have to change for that to be able to occur, and it makes it very clear in the eligibility criteria in our legislation and in all other legislation that it's got to be voluntary, it's got to be decision making, it's got to be an individual person. So yeah, I'm not sure if it wouldn't happen in our state.
I don't think it could happen here in Victoria either.
No, I'm sure it can't. I mean, there may be something with the dimension, the advanced care directives later on that's been examined.
Okay.
I did hear one on the thing that if somebody has dementia, within 3 months of that, their decision-making capacity is gone. If they are suffering, blah blah blah, but that's going to be for another discussion. Right. And it's not possible with our bill the way it's written, and nor should it be at this stage.
I just note we've got 4 or 5 minutes left.
Yep.
So we've got a few more questions to get through, and then we'll start to wrap it up, Mike. Note from Jane Morris, great work, Mike. Despite the fact that you've emphasised that VAD is not suicide, Are you concerned about the overriding Commonwealth law that bans any VAD telehealth consultations?
Yeah, now the really helpful here from the WA Attorney General, I think he wrote to the Commonwealth Attorney General with that issue. And because we say in the bill that it's not suicide, then...
As it does in the WA bill.
In the WA one, then... And I think when it was written in 2005, it was specifically for a different purpose. And now we've moved on. And now with COVID and whatever, look what we're doing tonight. Look what we're doing with telehealth, audio visual aids about things, And I know that in Victoria, one of the issues that I've spoken with some of the doctors there about is that inability and that worry that doctors might have in that audio visual space, and it shouldn't be there. And if a doctor is not 100% certain that the person's eligible, or if there's any inkling that there's anything, as would be with a normal doctor-patient, they wouldn't make a determination. They would go and see the person.
I must say that I find this objection that doctors will abuse the capacity to use telehealth to support their patients wanting to access VAD. I find that incredibly insulting to doctors who, in these sorts of situations, are going to be incredibly supportive and involved in their patient's case. And the idea that they would not do whatever is in the best interests of their patient is really pretty offensive, I would say.
And I think that the correspondence we received from the WA Attorney General said clearly that audiovisual telehealth is allowable because of what their bill says. And because if it's not suicide, then they're not discussing suicide in that. And so therefore audiovisual aids can be used. And this makes sense. I mean, if you think about it, how can we get somebody on the deathbed in King Island, down to Hobart to see their specialist or whatever and back if you can't move them? It just doesn't make sense. I have to say, because I know there's only a couple of minutes to go, my apologies to those out there if I've misled or not given enough information, or I've had to skip something because it's been so... it's such a quick...
Compressed.
So, but if anybody wants to contact me about anything, I'm more than happy to do that.
Terrific, Mike. I'm going to... there's a few questions that I'm not going to be able to get to, but I want to finish on this one because it's a tricky one, and it comes from when people registered. And this is David Brown, who says, "I'm concerned about the dishonesty in the public argument, where businesses that have a vested interest in keeping people alive don't disclose that interest when putting forward the case on social, moral, or legal grounds. I was told that on average," my cat just fell off there. "I was told that on average, more money is spent on an individual's hospital and medical expenses in the last 2 months of their life than in all the rest of their life, including birth. That sounded a bit high to me, but the principle stands, i.e. that globally the Catholic Church would lose billions of dollars if patients in their lucrative hospitals and nursing homes were allowed to end their life a day early. I don't know why this conflict of interest is not pointed to in the public campaigns, so that the public will see that their case is not pure virtue. It's informed by money. This doesn't make saving money a reason for people having a well-protected choice to make their moral decisions about their lives." Comment?
Yeah, I have heard also that the last 6 weeks of a person's life has up to 80% of their total. I have to say, whilst I believe that the Catholic Church does have, obviously has a relationship and obviously has an input into the financial side of it, people in care in those situations, I think, care for the individual as well. They don't see it as, let's extend the person's life for any financial gain. It's, so I'm really careful when I tread that line, because I know a lot of people who may be for or against it, who work in that space, that would do everything they could to allow to not let the person suffer. I haven't answered that very well, so I'll let others do that for me.
Well, I think, two issues. One is, we know, that is, the Rationalist Society knows, thanks to terrific research from Neil Francis, that there is a real gap between the leaders of these religious organisations and the people who are members of the religious organisations. So the people who care for patients who are in palliative care, they're I think that sort of motivation, that financial motivation, is very unlikely to be the case. Whether or not it has anything to do with the decisions by the religious leaders of these organisations, I mean, who knows? You'd have to probably be sitting around the table to know it. But, it's not an unreasonable thing to point out.
Oh, no.
And I think David is quite right that it hasn't been raised very often, possibly because we don't really have evidence. We're just surmising that this might be a factor in their decisions. Unfortunately, everybody, we're going to have to draw this to a close. I think, as you can see, Mike has just done an amazing job with this bill. I hesitate to say, Mike, what's next? Are you going to take a break, or are you going to bring on another one?
It's amazing how many people have now contacted me about an issue that they may have, and
Yes.
but we'll see. Yeah, no.
Anyway, look, I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody who's been part of this webinar, Mike, to say thank you so much for sharing so much of your energy, enthusiasm, knowledge, and increasing wisdom as you went through your own personal journey to getting this bill up, and with such acclaim from your colleagues. It's a real feather in your cap, and we are, all of us who are involved in this advocacy, are very, very grateful and in admiration for what you have achieved. So fantastic. We'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you again, Mike, for speaking to our seminar. And for all of you who can see us, but we can't see you, thank you for being part of this webinar. If you want to be part of future RSA webinars, the information will be on our website. That's rationalist.com.au. If you'd like to sign up for our free newsletters, please do so on our website. Even better, if you want to become a paid member, that would be terrific. And even more than that, if you want to give us some money so that we can continue to fight the good fight on your behalf, and everybody who really is donating to the cause of fighting the good fight against bigotry, against superstition, and against unfair religious privilege. So thank you, everybody. We'll call it a night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
No, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.